With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Chris on with me, and he researches Bigfoot, Sasquatch out of north central Arizona. So basically the Mogollon Rim. If you guys have ever done any Bigfoot research, that area certainly comes up. Yes, there is forest in Arizona. Go figure. It's not just desert and high desert. We do have woods there. Chris, welcome on the show.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm glad to be here.
So, Chris, we chatted a little bit before we officially started, and I know that you've been in this quite a long time from the sounds of it, but how did you get your start in Bigfoot specifically? Was it a sighting, or did you just see something in a book that got your, the feels going? Was it a movie? What was the situation as far as your inception into this?
32 years ago, the first and literally only time I ever went hunting, I had an encounter in southwestern Wisconsin, in a place known as the Wisconsin Dells. I could go into that if you like, but as a result, it kicked off a thirst for understanding, and a passion for this. It's stuck with me for the majority of my life. That's the abridged version of it.
Well, yeah, I actually would appreciate that if you wouldn't mind going into that. I think everybody would, including myself, is interested, especially in probably a first encounter.
Right on. Okay, so I was living actually on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, right where the St. Croix meets the Mississippi. I had a friend of mine that I'd met out there that was a big hunter, invited me to go out with him. So this is in February, I guess. And so we head out to this location. His family had a family cabin along the outskirts of this area. It's known as it's right near a place called the Wisconsin Dells, which is kind of a fairly well-known kind of wilderness nature area in like I said, in southwestern Wisconsin. Beautiful, beautiful area. We go out and we hike out to the area where we're supposed to try and hunt. And he sticks me in a stand of smaller pines and some bush. It's at the base of a I won't say a mountain, but a pretty steep hill, kind of almost like a canyon type situation. And he says, "Listen, I'm going to go take a path up to the top of this thing and try and beat some deer down to you. And you set up and you should get a pretty good shot at one if it comes across." Like, it's kind of the way they do it. So let me describe this. I'm in this stand, which is at the foot of this hill, and that's on my left. And on my right, running perpendicular to me is a little bit of a berm, and then it dipped down to a stream bed, probably about 40 feet below there, that ran, as I said, perpendicular to where I was. So I settle in. I'm cold, and I'm kind of excited. I got my license for this for the first time, and it's a new experience. I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so there wasn't a lot of hunting going on where I grew up, and it wasn't something my family had ever done. And so this is a new experience. And so probably about 45 minutes goes by, and I'm kind of taking it all in. It's super quiet because there's snow on the ground, and it's cold and a little uncomfortable, whatever. So I'd say about 45, 50 minutes go by, and I hear some grunting. I can't really pinpoint where it's coming from. And I'm thinking that perhaps he's, beat a deer down towards me. So I kind of get in position, and I'm looking out from the stand, and instead of anything coming to my left, which is down off the steep hill, I watched a guy, probably about, 30 yards in front of me, come up over the berm. And this is kind of a common thing. I thought it was a guy in a black hoodie. And I'm like, man, that, we're all in orange vests and kind of bright attire. And I'm thinking, well, there's an idiot. It's a good way to get shot out here. It wasn't a human. It came up over the berm, 7.5, 8 foot. At the time, it looked like, quite frankly, it looked like a walking gorilla with a man's face. And it came over the top of this thing. It took a few steps out into in between the hill and the ravine, and it turned around and it stared directly at me. And I was just paralyzed. I got like a good 15, 20-second look at its face, at its whole body, hairy, obviously. I mean, it looked like, quite frankly, in hindsight, like a patty type Sasquatch. So it grunts at me, it turns around, and it walks back down the way it came. And it didn't run, it walked, stepped over the berm, and then just disappeared down the side of the hill. And I try and always reflect back on my feelings and what I was experiencing. And I think part of it was just cognitive dissonance and shock. I'm no, zoologist, but at the time, I was thinking, I'm fairly sure there's no apes running around in North America, especially in Wisconsin, that I'd ever heard of. So probably another half an hour, 40 minutes goes by, and my friend comes down off the hill. I don't even know how to approach him with this. I can remember thinking, this dude's going to think I'm absolutely insane. But I was paralyzed. I won't say that I was a bit fearful. I don't feel like the entity was menacing me, but it was menacing. It was intimidatingly big. And so I came running out and I said, Tim, I got to ask you, have you ever? And I broke down what happened to me, and he got a look on his face, and the first words out of his mouth, "Oh, so you saw him then?" A little context to that story. He broke it down for me that these sightings had occurred. His family had this place up there for generations, and it was part of their kind of family folklore. That his grandfather used to tell him about it. They used to call him the wild man of the hills or something like that, to that effect, and that they'd had generational sightings of either this guy or another one for close to 100 years. And so that kind of that was my introduction into the Sasquatch phenomenon, and it was a full physical situation, a thirst for understanding that has ebbed and flowed over the last 32 years, but it's never left me, and that's how I got involved in this.
Well, I would say that, yeah, that would pretty much do it for me. That's for sure. So I'm sure that once Tim came back around and you're talking to him about this, you're going, oh gosh, what is he going to think about me? What is he going to say about me? He's going to say I'm a kook. And then thank goodness he's going, oh, so you saw him too. That must have been a huge relief.
I think I felt a little bit more validated, I mean, it's good to know that I wasn't hallucinating and or that I hadn't seen something else. I mean, I know what I saw looked like. And I think we probably went back to we went back to the cabin and we talked about it for a while, and I probably peppered him with questions, and that was that.
So I know that you were obviously above him in a tree stand, and he's down in this berm area, and it would be awkward to know exactly. But how tall would you guess that this thing was? How large was he?
He was large. He was, if I guess, I would say between 7 and 8 foot. I would have to say that. I mean, it's super broad shoulders. He, if I were to hazard a guess, 800 pounds, 700 pounds. I mean, he was big, man. I mean, just really large. He wasn't like a big girth, a huge chest, big shoulders, muscular legs. The face was, like it's a common theme that you hear, but it really, if I were to look at it, it more of a flat nose. It wasn't a primate's face. It was a face of a man, and it wasn't, the hair wasn't around his cheeks. It was like a wild beard almost. with like, wild sideburns and just kind of all blended down into the rest of his hair on his body.
Chris, did it ever cross your mind for a split second that if this large, whatever, now looking back, you don't know what it was at the time. I'm sure you could, well, that would be the next question, but let me finish this first one. Did it ever cross your mind, if this comes at me, I'm in a lot of trouble, like you're going to need a bigger gun kind of a situation?
Not being a gun guy and not being, violent by nature, I think back, I don't know how I would have responded if it had made a move towards me. I mean, I know I was armed, but again, like I said, it just dismissed me. You know what I mean? So, but I don't know how that would have gone if it had been aggressive. I'm not sure how I would have responded, quite frankly. I know that I was not moving. I won't say that it was doing anything to me with intent, to freeze me in my tracks, but the shock of it and the awe of it did that on its own.
So at that time, being 32 years ago, were you aware of Bigfoot at all? Like in your mind, did you go, oh, that's one of those Bigfoot creatures, it must be? Or were you just kind of just blown away by what even that was?
I wasn't vested in the phenomenon at all. I'm sure I had seen like the Patterson Gimlin. I can remember being in the Poconos when I was a kid, and we had gone to a movie night at one of the lodges where my family's up on a ski trip. I remember seeing the Patterson Gimlin footage. I think it was a Bigfoot movie. I was like 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old, so I didn't have like a lot of context to look back on and look at it. But from that point on, and this is before the birth of the digital age and the internet, I started trying to find literature that would kind of flesh it out a little bit, but that really came probably 10 years later when the internet blossomed, and that type of research was more readily available for me.
So I suppose it makes quite a bit of sense to go in order as much as we can. There'll be a little bit of going, around and back and forth and things. And I'm kind of the queen of tangents anyway. But so what would the next thing be for you? Did you kind of after that did that change at all then? I know you weren't a big hunter or anything, but after that, did you go, well, I think I'm good on hunting. That kind of freaked me out. I mean, what was the next thing for you?
Shannon, I think people go in multiple directions when they have this type of thing happen to them. When your reality kind of gets switched up, I think people either try and ignore it, throw some human logic at it, and divest it from their brains as much as possible, or they react in a fearful way. And you hear enough stories about people being traumatized by some of these encounters, or they go in another direction, which is just a quest for knowledge and understanding. And I think I went in that direction. It was a good almost decade. Obviously YouTube wasn't around, Google and Wikipedia weren't around, none of that stuff was there. But I think that so I had always had somewhat of a esoteric leanings and belief system. I'd had some kind of ghostly things happen to me as a kid, and I was also brought up in a somewhat devout Christian household, so there was always that kind of nagging at the back of my brain. So I would say I got married and had kids, and I was pretty much wrapped up in daily life like that, and those were my priorities. And when my kids got a bit older, and actually I got divorced, and I started re-engaging with this probably in 2006, 2007. At that time, I'd always, you think about the people where you could get some interesting information. And for me, I worked third shift, and I used to listen to Art Bell religiously forever. I'd get my work done. I'd sit in my truck and I would listen to Coast to Coast. And say what you want about guys like Art Bell or Linda Moulton Howe, but they were really the ones carrying the torch where else were you going to get a syndicated national program that talked about some of these fringe topics? That exposed me a little bit later to people like David Paulides, some of these other kind of, I will say, first gen digital personalities. So I started to reach out to some of these guys, and I was lucky enough to make friends with Scott Carpenter, rest in peace, and a few of these other maybe more public names. And I started doing my own at the time. I don't think any of us consider ourselves researchers anymore, but I've walked that road. I started going out into a nature preserve. I lived in New England at the time, in Rhode Island, and in southern Rhode Island is very rural and very well forested. And I started going out to this nature preserve. I'd made friends with a man by the name of Mark Abel. Mark's been around for 11 or 12 years online on YouTube, and he's the guy who runs Colorado Bigfoot. And I reached out to Mark, and I've actually been out with him numerous times. I started looking at what he was coming across in the Rockies, and a lot of it at the time was structural things. And I started finding structures out in the woods, and that were matching up with the things I was seeing other people do. And then I started the gifting stuff. The first time I ever did it, I left some beef jerky on a rock near a structure, and I came back the next day and it was gone, and there was an Indian quartz arrowhead left in its place. That's pretty cool, right? So I started having, like so many people do that research, I started trying to provoke responses, and that was in Rhode Island, and that was for a good 10 years, and I, paying attention to what some of these other guys were doing. I emulated some of it, and I had some varying degrees of success. I had another full physical sighting at this place in Rhode Island, this preserve that I used to go to, and it was just a real brief. I had in the same area where I'd been doing the gifting. I had one step out from the side of a tree, and then step back in and disappear. And it was a big red Sasquatch. And I started. As I said, I started emulating some of these guys, and I started to have some degrees of success with it. And I was also able to take a deeper dive into, origin stories and things of that nature. And that was kind of where that journey started to take me. So about 6 years ago, I had the opportunity to move to the Southwest, and, I'm single. My kids are grown. I made a network of friends that are engaged in this phenomenon for a long time, most of it online. I reached out to a guy that I knew in Arizona named Kevin Keeney, and he actually keeps a small channel which kind of documents our experiences in Arizona. So I met up with Kevin, and we decided to meet up in person up on the Mogollon Rim. I love the fact that you pronounce that properly, by the way.
Thank you.
And right, I've heard all different variations, but it's Mogollon. And so I meet up with Kevin, and I went out with Kevin, and I spent 4 or 5 days up on the rim that absolutely changed my life. Kevin had been engaged in this for about, 10 years, and he had a couple locations on the rim that were just super active, and he'd been showing up doing the same thing there for years, and having just unbelievable encounters and experiences, all of it really good. And I saw some things that first 4 days I went out with Kev that literally changed my life. I think back then we considered ourselves researchers. We were still doing all the gifting and trying to take video and take pictures and trying, like I said, provoke responses, and, we had a lot of success with that. And then some of these other phenomenon started occurring amongst us. We started, all of us, there's basically 5 of us involved. And these guys are all of them they're vets. I'm the only one that's not a vet. One of our guys was the fire chief of Payson, Arizona for 30 years. Guys that have a lot of local kind of cachet in our communities, and yet we're all bonded over these shared experiences and time out with each other, and we're all very close. Actually, Kevin is actually an ordained minister, and I got married a year ago in May, and Kevin presided over my wedding, which is in Prescott National Forest with a all the Arizona 4 in attendance. So it was a beautiful thing. So that's kind of and so for the last 6 years, really, we've had a continuous gathering amongst us. We go out quite a bit up until the snow hits the rim, and a few other spots that we have, and we've continued to have some pretty amazing things happen, and been around this for some incredible encounters.
Well, Chris, would you mind sharing a couple of they don't have to be the whole thing if you don't want, but some of the examples of why those 4 or 5 days straight out of the gate changed your life?
Sure. So, okay, the first night I'm up, okay, we didn't really know each other. We knew each other online for a couple of years, but we weren't, we were kind of online buddies, you know what I mean? But now this is face to face, and he's my age. He's a decorated war vet from the Gulf War, and just a solid, great person. And he grew up, born and raised in the superstitions. So he's a great outdoorsman. He's taught me so much, really he has. So we get out, and we're feeling each other out, and Kevin's been at this spot for a couple good 5 or 6 years where we're going. We're bouncing each other's understanding and theories and all that conjecture that kind of goes with this. So the first day, at the time, Kevin still had a spot that he liked to gift, right? So we go out, and it's about a quarter mile away from the camp, and we head out. I'd suffered an ankle injury years and years before. I walked with a pronounced limp for a good 20 some odd years, and we get back to our campsite, and I've got my little SUV. That was when I'm camping out of the back of it, quite basically. I go to get something. Kevin and I were sharing some literature and a few things, and I said, Kevin, let me go get you something. I get to the car, and or to the truck, and I'm reaching in, and all of a sudden I get overcome with this utter wave of exhaustion, right? And I mean, like, just like it came over me immediately, which is very rare because I don't take naps, things like that. So I said, Kev, I gotta lay down, man. I'm sorry. And so I lay down, and I conk out the back of this thing for about 4 hours, right? I mean, I'm out like a light. I wake up around 6 o'clock. He's like, man, you were out. I'm like, I know, man. So he goes, well, let's no, let me preface it. We had been hiked out to this area. He was showing it to me. He goes, well, let's go out, because it was right before dusk. He goes, let's go out and leave something for these guys. So we walk back out there, and we're about halfway out. It occurs to me that I'm not limping at all, like not at all. And I have no pain in my right foot and my right ankle, zero. So we get out there, and I mention it to Kevin, and he just kind of gives me a knowing look. It occurs to me that whatever had been going on with this injury to my ankle, which had been a continuous problem for me for, like I said, 2 decades, it was gone. It was completely removed, and it's never come back. And like, I've never had another issue with my foot. It literally, it's 100%, and it had been maybe 50% prior to this trip. That was the precursor. So some sort of healing had occurred on my foot. That was the precursor. That night. So the way we do it is, at this point, and from that point, even prior to my involvement, it's not like we're out hiking, banging on trees, making calls into the night. We sit in the dark. More often than not, things will start to happen around us, and they come into us. So that was my first experience doing that. We're sitting around, and all of a sudden this phenomenon starts to happen that we refer to it as twinkle lights. We're in the middle of the forest in the pitch black. I think it was a new moon at the time. It looks like little Christmas LED lights start popping off in the forest, and they come in closer. As we've gone on, on a caveat, whatever that is, it seems to either herald their presence, or it happens when they're around, So that happens, and then we start hearing footsteps around us, multiple ones, bipedal, probably in a 20-foot radius from where we are. And then these visual kind of disturbances start to appear around us. And Kevin's completely calm. I'm like, what? This is my first time ever experiencing something like this. And next thing you know, we're surrounded by about 7 of these tall, shimmering, I hate to use the term cloaked, but in hindsight, like that's what we would call it, beings in a semicircle around us. I mean, it was what it was, you know what I mean? And there wasn't any fear involved. I think I was a little unnerved, but Kevin's completely calm. Then that stops, and we start, all kinds of audible phenomenons going on, and this lasts till about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then we go to bed, and that repeated itself in various ways for the next 3 nights that we were out. So on top of that, like that over the course of that time, I mean, I saw orbs floating through the forest. And I don't mean like, oh, maybe that's an orb. I mean just brilliant red and blue colored orbs that would be snaking through the trees. One really odd thing, where we are is probably maybe 10 miles as the crow flies from where Travis Walton was abducted, right? So, that's on my mind because I knew that, I knew that story fairly well. So one night we're walking out in the pitch black out to the gifting area, and as we're walking back, now mind you, we're up on the rim, but we are 10 miles away from Rim Road, which goes along. I mean, there is not another soul out near us within a 20-mile radius, man, maybe more. And we're in a pretty remote spot. Like, it's tough if you don't have a 4-wheel rig, like, you're not getting back there. As we're walking back, about 100 yards in front of us to our left, the entire forest lights up like somebody had turned on a switch. It was like stadium lights. And like, it was like broad daylight, but it wasn't really emanating towards us. It was just central to that location. I look at Kevin with a searchlight going on. There's no moon, yet this is happening. As we got closer, probably within 50 yards of it, it's like somebody turned a switch and it turned right back off and went back to being pitch black. So those are the type of things that happened that first time out with Kevin Keeney and my intro into the Arizona 4, as it were.
So, Chris, I'm assuming that Kevin, prior to you going out, you had been talking to him, and at what point did he tell you, "Hey, Chris, I know that we're going out for Bigfoot, but they're not what you think. We're not going out to hang out with apes running around the woods. There might be some other things going on, and they're not what you think they are."
We'd had a lot of that discussion prior to, and I wasn't at this point of my journey, I wasn't looking for apes at all. I've never been an aper, for lack of a better term, because I've just, the nature of the things that I'd witnessed in Rhode Island, some of this stuff was paranormal. It just was, you know what I mean? And I, so that wasn't really on my brain at the time. Plus I'd followed Scott for years and got to know him. And so I was definitely vested more into the paranormal side of this than I don't think I ever was anything else. And so Kevin's exact words were, "I can't promise you anything's going to happen, but I can tell you that I've never had anything not happen." That was basically the intro, and that was pretty broad. You know what I mean? I didn't know what happened would mean, and that was so that was kind of like my mindset going into this. And Kevin hadn't super prepped me for some of the stuff that I known about Kevin's backstory and some of the stuff that he had witnessed. His stories, and just it's an incredible tale, and that's for him to tell. I can touch on some of the bullet points of it, but as a result, over the course of the next couple of months, I met the rest of the other guys. We don't usually all congregate at the same time. It's usually 2 or 3 of us, but it's always been a different combination of it, and in multiple locations, not all of it on the rim. So yeah, that's kind of where I was at that time.
So that's interesting. So not the combination is different. And I know I've asked this before when it comes to group situations. Do you notice that the activity is different or less or more depending on who is there or not there?
That's a great question, because I don't believe that any list for for some sort of ramped up activity. There are those among us that don't resonate with things like mindspeak as well as some other ones do. So that changes some things. If two of us will get something and the third guy won't hear anything, I mean, that it is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, they kind of do what they do when they do it. There's most of us have been, I mean, some of the stuff when it comes out of my mouth, Shannon, like I still objectively look at it like, dude, that sounds crazy. But I mean, I'm just going to speak my truth, right? So, like, all of us have received a name. We've all gotten names that we can call them, and there's some back history to that is fascinating as well. We'll get into that whenever. But so I don't know. Short version, I don't think that there's any combination or any one specific one of us that activates activity. I think that each of us we're all resonating on the right vibe with them. I think that accesses them a little bit easier than other people do. I don't know that everybody is supposed to see it and experience it. And I'm not sure. That's just a theory that I have. But I think that maybe there is something to the tagging phenomenon that you hear talked about. I don't know if that's what it is. I think that they can feel. So here's what I believe. You don't have to be a perfect human being to go in here and do this, and none of us are, and none of the Arizona 4 guys are. But I think that when they know that, I think it changes some things. And when I try and present as honestly and authentic as I can, internally and externally, when I'm there, you know what I mean? And I try and keep that in the back of my mind at all times. And I think they recognize a degree of authenticity, however they read people. And that's how I think all of us are like that, and not all of us are as spiritual as others. And I don't know what role that plays in it, but there's definitely a spiritual component that's involved with it.
This is something that has come up a lot when we're talking about Bigfoot, as much as you use the term apers don't like to discuss, and they, can ignore certain things, to be honest with you. So when you're talking about vibrating on a certain level, I've heard this before. Now, the other thing that I've heard before is talking about your ankle and you having it essentially healed while you're out, essentially, for lack of a better term, looking for Bigfoot. You're out there researching, you're out there doing the thing. I have heard this before, and for the life of me right now, while we're recording, I cannot think of what episode that was. But I've heard this pretty much the exact same story. It wasn't an ankle, I don't think, but it was the exact same thing. So that I'll have to look into. And I'm sure the people that have those types of abilities are already screaming out the number and can get in touch with me about that, which episode that was. But that is fascinating.
I have got a showstopper story that involves a healing on me personally that will blow your mind. I've talked about it publicly before, but I don't think you've heard it.
Let's do it. Let's hear it. Yeah.
The most incredible thing. If I were to say the highlight experience of my life and the biggest game changer of my life is this story. So 3.5 years ago, I was involved in an industrial accident where I work. I crushed, mangled, then amputated my right hand at the wrist. And I've just an absolutely catastrophic injury. It pulled the flexor tendons out of my elbow and it destroyed my shoulder. It was just like something that happens to other people, a life changer. So I'm hospitalized for the better part of 3 months. A vascular surgeon and an orthopedic surgeon kind of Frankenstein my hand back on. And they got blood flow to it, but it was completely non-functional. I couldn't pronate and supinate my right arm. I couldn't move my fingers. I was missing a finger now after they put it back together. My shoulder, I had no shoulder rotation, none of it. I get out of the hospital and I'm probably about as low physically, mentally, spiritually, in all ways as I've ever been in my life. I mean, it just altered my existence. So I'm home for about 2 weeks, and at the time, my hand is still my arm and hand are still heavily bandaged, and I'm in a sling that pulls my arm directly up against my chest, because if not, it'll just drop down to the ground. I have no muscle. I have nothing going on there. So Kevin calls me and says, "Listen, we're me and another guy by the name of Chuck Jacobs. He's the fire chief in Payson, the retired one, are heading out to one of our spots on the rim. We want you to come with." And I said, "Kev, I can't even pull my pants up. I can't tie my shoes. I can't help set up. Like, literally, I didn't want to go, And he's like, "Chris, we'll put up a 10-man tent. I'll throw 2 cots in there, and Chuck and I will take care of everything. All you got to do is come up and show up." So I reluctantly agree. So the next day, I'm one arming my SUV, which I probably shouldn't have been driving, up to the rim, and I get back to this location. And actually, I'm sorry, it was not on the rim. We have another spot that we go to north of Roosevelt Lake, off the Young Highway. That's up in the kind of the southern part of the Superstitions. Just an absolutely magical place, and we call it Crazy Town. Every one of our spots we have a little nickname for. So we get out there, and I mean, it's late October on the rim, or on a Crazy Town, up in 9,000, 10,000 foot elevation. So it is cold, right? So the first night we're out, we don't really have any activity, maybe a few twinkle lights. It was just a really kind of a quiet night, and that's fine. I mean, there's no guarantees. And I was just kind of decompressing from this 3-month horror show that I'd just been involved with. So that night, I go to lay down in the tent, and I lay down on the cot. I drift off. Now, I take my sling off while I'm sleeping, because my shoulder and arm will fall asleep, and it's just super uncomfortable, and I just have to lay a certain way. So a couple hours later, I get awakened. Do you know what a TENS unit is, Shannon?
Absolutely, I have one.
Okay, right on. So imagine somebody stuck the diodes of a TENS unit on the back of your neck and turn the output up to like maximum output. I get this electrical shock wave of electricity that starts at the base of my neck, travels down to my feet, and back up to my neck. And this lasts for probably about 2 minutes. And it wasn't painful, but it was super intense. So, in my mind, I'm thinking, I know I've been zapped before. Like, I know what that is, but this was like that on steroids. It was at a completely different level. It was really bizarre. But I know in my mind, I'm thinking this is the forest people that are doing this. And for whatever reason, you don't always know why they do anything they do. So I fall back asleep after it subsides. So the next morning I wake up, and Kevin and I were sharing a tent. He was already out of the tent, and I never mentioned it. It was the middle of the night. He was snoring away when it happened, and I got to go relieve myself. So I leave the tent, and Kevin and Chuck are starting a morning fire, probably about 20 yards from the tents, and in a place where we sit. We don't sit out with fires, but we usually have one in the morning in the up in elevation, because it's freezing. I mean, it's like in the 20s. We're all bibbed up, right? So I walked to about 20 feet from where they're getting the fire going, and I unzipped my bibs to go to the bathroom. And I did it with my right hand. And as the zipper's coming down and my fingers are on the zipper, I realize what I'm doing. And it was like muscle memory, So I pull my hand up, and I start to flex my fingers, which was medically impossible. I don't have flexor tendons anymore. So my fingers, I start to move. I start to gently rotate my right arm. And like I said, I could not pronate or supinate my right arm at all. The pain is gone in my hand. The pain is gone in my arm and my shoulder. And I regained a degree of function that, like I said, was medically impossible. It was impossible. And as it dawned on the night before and what's going on there, I start to cry, because I am just all the 3 months of surgery and intense pain and trauma, like, all the stuff that I just been through, and it was like it was gone, and Kevin and Chuck are watching me, and they're watching what I'm doing, and they're both very familiar with the nature of this accident, this injury. So I walk down the trail a little bit to try and compose myself, because I'm sobbing, just sobbing. As I get a little bit down the trail, I know that they did this, and I reach out in my mind, and I say out loud as well. I say, thank you so much. I am so grateful. Thank you. Right after those words came out of my mouth, I get hit with this. How do I explain it? It was like I walked into a bubble of love and compassion that wasn't coming from within me. It was being projected onto me. Shannon, I'm telling you, it altered me as a human being. You think in my 50s that I have some understanding of, mature love and compassion. And it was a lesson that I have held on to ever since that happened, to try and project that into myself and into my life and people around me. It changed me as a person. It was so profound. That was in October of 21. We're coming up on almost 3 years. There was a lot more to this because it was a work injury. There was money involved, obviously. And I didn't know how to even approach the orthopedic that had done the 22 surgeries with this. I really didn't know even how to do it. So I ended up getting a second opinion and changing doctors. And that's how I moved forward with it. I think ethically, I probably could have been better. I'm not a perfect person. If I was honest, I was no longer in the degree of pain that was projected on paper, and the degree of my injury had changed significantly instantaneously as a result of this. So I think I justified it with the fact of the amount of trauma that I'd been through. But yeah, man, that was the experience that changed my life. It also changed a lot of my beliefs about the origins of these guys, and it was a beautiful, beautiful, profound experience for me. It's the one that I hang my hat on as just the showstopper for me, in my life.
Well, I could imagine. So your function has stayed at that level after that morning and that night with that TENS unit feeling. It has stayed at that level. It has not degraded or improved from there. It stayed right there.
It did more for me. Obviously I continue to work on it, but I have a degree of function that, while not perfect, is exponentially better than it should be.
Wow.
Like my aspirations of a concert pianist have dimmed rapidly, but
you never know.
But I can function. It doesn't really slow me down in life anymore, and that was not the case before I got up there. This was my entire upper right extremity had been rated 100% fully disabled. Shannon, it's not. It's nowhere near that number. I still have some challenges. I don't have a full range of motion with my fingers that are left. I can't really have a pinch, but I couldn't move them. There was nothing there to move them, So yeah, that was the nature of it.
Yeah, that is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. I know that can't be easy to talk about, and the second you bring it up, I'm sure that your mind goes right to when it happened and the moments thereafter, and the months, obviously, that you were in pain like that. That is an incredible story. So thank you so much for sharing that. So you brought up I think that their origins and their history is important, and the fact that they essentially allowed you, some of you guys, you said they gave you their names, right? So can we talk about that and how long it took to get to that point, and their origins, as much as you know about it?
So 32 years later, here's the reality. I feel like I honestly know less now than I thought I did 20 years ago. So I'll go into origins, then names, in that order. So there was a time where I used to believe that some of the biblical creationists and the Nephilim guys were spot on. I used to think that Scott had hit the nail on the head, and it checked a lot of boxes. I mean, if these guys were descended from some fallen angelic being and a human, that they would possibly have some abilities that we don't have or forgot. And and so, like I said, it checked a lot of boxes. It made a lot of sense. So Kevin said to me, all that stuff, anybody who says that they know anything, in my humble opinion, is full of it, because it is literally, I don't care how much you research or what we delve into, it is all conjecture. Every bit of it is conjecture. That's the truth. That being said, if we go down the Nephilim road, right? Like Kevin is very devout, and like I said, he's ordained, and he dismissed that because of the nature of his experiences a long time ago, and that last healing experience that I had, that changed my thinking 100%. Kevin said, "Do you really think that a Nephilim would ever, if they were descended and not of God and inherently evil, that they would ever do something like heal a human being and give solace and relief to a human being? Would that even be in their nature to do?" And I would counter that with, well, just because you're German doesn't make you a Nazi. But that made sense to me, that would they even be able to project that feeling of compassion and love? And I'll even preface that by saying I could be greatly deceived as well. I don't hang my hat as 100%er on any of this, but my leanings now go towards that they are not. I always think that the biblical creationists, there's merit in things like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, Genesis. There's merit in there. There's knowledge in there, but I always think it's too confined, too narrowly interpreted. It's not all defining. So no, I don't believe that that's what they are. It could be a part of it, I guess. I think what the nature of their origins are, that's still open for debate. You can get the non-spiritual folk that know there's a paranormal aspect to this, and then it kind of bleeds over into ufology, and I mean, many of us have gone down the Zachariah Sitchin road and the Anunnaki stuff, and again, that is all conjecture. So I think the jury's still out. I don't think that, and I will also say that our experiences are just a segment on the spectrum of experiences. I know there are those that have had horrifying negative encounters. I believe that. So I think the jury's still out, Shannon. I think that trying to get to the bottom of it, I don't know that we're ever, until one of these things comes out and sits down in a campfire and cracks a beer open and starts breaking it down for us. I don't think we're ever going to truly know with a surety, and I don't trust anybody that speaks about this with a surety, getting access to information that most of us that have done a deep enough dive don't already have, so that's kind of my thinking on that.
Can I just say that I respect that response so much? And yes, I feel like more people need to be open-minded like that. And you've said several times, we just don't know. And that is the mic drop answer right there. So thank you for that, Chris. I respect that so much. Can we zip back to essentially your very first few days going up to the Mogollon Rim, where you were talking about the 7-foot tall shimmering beings in the semicircle, right? And you kind of had this going on all night. Were they in that state of this, essentially the predator, right? The shimmery beings, the cloaking, as you say,
Right.
that's like a 4-letter word to a lot of people, but for lack of a better term. But did they ever?
It's usable.
Yeah, it's like a trigger word, right? So let's trigger some people, Chris. Let's get them. Did they ever, again, for lack of a better term that my brain can come up with, did they ever phase further in or out of that? Did you see them, quote unquote, disappearing, or did you see them forming into this hairy beast, or more like an ape, or something that we would we would put our finger on closer to a classic Bigfoot.
Right. Not on that trip, Shannon. Like I thought I saw one of those nights, and remember, it was a new moon, and even after your eyes acclimate to the dark, I mean, it's still tough to see, right? I thought I saw maybe 20 or 30 feet in front of us along the forest line. For a brief second, I thought I saw a physical form of Bigfoot, but I couldn't hang my hat on it. I wouldn't even really call it a sighting. It was just maybe. I have seen that happen over the course of time, but not on that first trip. No, I mean, we heard footsteps and a lot of it, and it wasn't like faint rustling. I mean, it was pronounced thump, thump, thumps, but that was as close to any physicality that I experienced on that first trip.
But it does happen to where you'll see them kind of in predator mode. Have you ever seen one in predator mode and it's still just right where it is and you're watching it phase, essentially, for lack of a better term, phase in to where it turned into this hairy big creature?
I've seen the opposite of that. I've seen them phase out or cross the veil or whatever it is they're doing.
Right.
You know, I've seen that happen. You know, and I've been around people, part of our guys that have, you know, I mean, one thing we don't do is hoax each other ever, even play jokes on each other because, you know, I mean, the veracity of what we're communicating to each other has to be 100% pure or it's worthless, right? So we don't play jokes. We don't do anything like that. So anything that comes out of any of these guys' mouths, I trust implicitly. I've seen them go from, you know, a full physical form and take a step and it wasn't like a process. They just weren't there. You know what I mean? So that's the nature of what I've seen as far as them kind of morphing into whatever it is they do.
Have you guys ever, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to ask or just see what you thought about this. Have you ever, because I know there's a certain number of you guys that go out and yes, the iterations can change about who's available and who's out and who's not. Have you ever taken anybody out there and then, you know, outside of your group to where their vibration isn't where it needs to be, so there's no activity whatsoever? Has that ever happened?
So we have taken maybe less than 4 people or 5 people out with us over the time that I've been involved. Kevin took a movie producer up, which was a huge mistake. And so we had a guy find us through tracking us down through How to Hunt's chat, right? And so this, you know, we vet anybody, you know, like Chuck will talk to anybody, but to take anybody anywhere, you know, you got to get through a bit of a screening process, for lack of a better term. And so this guy, we've had 2 people that have had negative experiences while with us. So this one guy they took out, I wasn't there for this trip. He bolted out of there at the middle of the night at like 2:00 in the morning, freaked out. He reached out to Chuck when we got off the rim and told him that he was flat out specifically told in his head, "You are not welcome here, leave now." I don't know the nature of I don't think they had a lot of activity that evening, but it turned out that this guy had lied to Chuck and he came clean with him. And he said he'd had an encounter in the White Mountains near Sholo, Arizona. He took a shot with a firearm at what he saw. He didn't divulge that to us because we wouldn't have brought him out. You know, that would have been a no, a hard no. Yet they knew that, and they did not want him up there, and he left at 2:00 in the morning.
Wow.
and literally ran out of there like his butt was on fire. Yeah.
Holy crap.
You know?
Okay, so how far, Chris, is Sholo from where they were that night?
So Sholo borders the White Mountains. It's probably about, I don't know, 30 miles from the New Mexico line, and the rim. This is up on the rim. Runs the 260 is the main highway that connects central Arizona over going east to west to New Mexico. I'm going to say it's 80 miles, maybe 90 miles from that spot.
That is so cool. Yeah. And so those beings / creatures, whatever you want to call them, they knew that he had done this and said, "Get the hell out of here right now."
Yeah. I mean, they bounced him right out, and I mean, he was very clear what happened. And this guy, he was former law enforcement. I mean, he wasn't a disturbed individual, for lack of a better term. You know what I mean? He was definitely interested, and he wanted to see what we had going on. But again, like, they know you're in. I mean, you hear this, but it's the truth. Like, they can read you. We have arguments sometimes because there's one of the arguments is one of us believes thoroughly that they're what one knows they all know, and I don't know that to be true, but I believe what one knows, they can access what another one knows fairly quickly. You know what I mean? However that transpires. I don't know that there's a big collective consciousness that they're all drawing from, but I think that they can vet and access each other over long distances. I believe that.
I mean,
and can find out real quick.
well, and also, I mean, who knows what their travel area is? I mean, 80 miles to us on foot that would be quite daunting. I mean, people do that in triathlons, but
right.
Maybe it was the same family group, or somebody was present at that time, and then it's just like a small town, right? Like, word travels fast, kind of a thing. Not that I'm poo-pooing the mind connection. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
No. I think that has value. Like, we so 2 years ago we checked out a new place, right? We call it West Side. The first night, it was Kevin and myself out, and these guys did not know us. I mean, they knew that we knew, but we had a big rock thrown at us. I mean, it wasn't like the vibe was we know you're here, we know we're here. Let's just see how it goes, type thing. You know what I mean? But over the course of our time there, they dropped mindspeak some names that we were familiar with, and I think so that they became a little bit more welcoming as a result. But I don't think that and that's probably 40 miles from where one of our primary spots is. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think we believe that at Crazy Town up on the Young Highway that there's two mountains up there, and we believe there's a family group possibly on each mountain, and the valley where we camp is kind of a converging point and a meeting ground for them. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I don't think that they require land space like maybe human logically we would think they do. I think they can access. I mean, Kevin's had visitations at his home. I have as well. I mean, there's been, which I don't. I've lived the furthest away from the rim. I live in Prescott, which is it's an hour to get to the Mogollon Rim for me. You know what I mean? So I'm not. I think the jury's still out there, Shannon. I don't know if they can just. I mean, I hear terms like terms like portal. Such a commonly thrown around term. Like I've heard guys say, oh, there's a portal in my backyard, and all I can think of is, you don't know that. Maybe they can just do it themselves. You know what I mean? Like I'm not. I think the jury's still out on a lot of that stuff. I've seen things that may be portal phenomenon, but I'm not going to label it as such. Maybe it's just kind of like cloaking, a term of reference for that type of energy. You know what I mean? But I don't really remember where we were going with this, but other than I know you had a question that I got lost in my rant.
No, that's okay. No. So I do want to hear at least a little bit about these home visits. That's fascinating. But before we do, can you speak about the other person that did have a negative experience when you took them out?
Yeah. So we had another guy come up, and this is kind of where we started declining asks to go, because it was another type of experience. This is a guy who again left in the middle of the night because he didn't get mind speak, but he just had a sense of fear and foreboding the entire time we were out. He emailed us later and said he had to get up and go to the bathroom like 20 times in an hour, and just strange things. He wasn't sick. He felt such anxiety and physically distressed being up there. So I can't hang my hat on whether they were doing that to him or not, but that was where we were kind of like, okay, maybe this isn't, maybe it's not our spot to determine who comes up here and who doesn't,
Right.
or who, just unilaterally make those choices. So we pretty much kind of closed the door on that as a result, So that was the gist of the second guy. Again, he left at 1 o'clock and then 2 o'clock in the morning, just bailed out, like he was freaked out, and without any real explanation other than physical distress,
And it's okay if this would give too much away for whatever reason, but what was his intention of being there? Was he, again, like some, producer or wanted to...
He had found us online, after doing some Sherlock Holmesing, came across Chuck's page and Chuck's channel and reached out. And so a little context on Chuck. Chuck's probably the most public out of all of us. He started this thing out. He was, up until a couple of months ago, the lead BFRO investigator in the state of Arizona. And he started out this thing in Moneymaker's narrative and Cliff's narrative, and I watched the full conversion of Chuck from atheist, aper to paranormal, gets on his knees and prays every day. And he's 74 years old. I mean, he's, pretty set in his ways, and it changed his life. So as a result, but Chuck stayed with the BFRO even after his conversion because he liked collecting the stories, and he liked that aspect of it. Plus he had access to maybe the back files of the BFRO that aren't put on the website. You know what I mean? So, and he just got locked out of it like a month and a half ago. No phone call from Matt, and him and Matt had it out on the phone a couple of years ago, and he thought Matt was going to fire him, and he didn't. You know what I mean? So, yeah, as a result, Chuck was more prone to maybe meeting with people, and if he liked what he heard, he would invite them out, and that door's been shut a while ago.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about these home visits. I was not expecting that. That is very interesting.
I'd heard of it. I always believed that Scott Carpenter, the main reason why Scott stopped actively researching a few years before he passed away was because he was getting unnerved with the activity around his home. He thoroughly believed that when you actively seek them out, it gives them sanction to actively seek you out. And I think there may be something to that. I don't believe it's in that written biblical covenant that he would ascribe to, but I think there's a curiosity. And I think that once they can access you and they know that you can access them, those type of things seem to happen. Kev's had up at his house, he lives right in the shadows of the rim, which is closer. He's had visitations on his property, like and basic things, footprints, dog food missing type stuff. He's had some mindspeak in his house where he believed they were there. That's the nature of that. Chuck's had the same thing. So I moved up to Prescott a couple of years ago, but I was living in Phoenix, and when I first started out with these guys, and I living in this little gated community in North Phoenix. I had a huge footprint show up, and I mean, it wasn't like maybe that's a footprint in my little back patio area on the dirt. And then I also had a very strange visitation type thing happen at like 3 o'clock in the morning in my bedroom. One of the most unnerving things that's ever happened, because Shannon, I'll say this, there's a lot going on out there simultaneously, and not all of it is Sasquatch. I believe that. I think there's a lot of other things happening in that realm that aren't these guys. You know what I mean? And I had a very negative, oppressive, malicious thing in my bedroom, a big shadow thing that just kind of creeped up, and I reverted back to my Christian roots and tried to rebuke it in the name of Christ. It laughed at me, and then it left. And that was the gist of it. That's the only time I've ever had anything like that occur. And that was, 3 years ago. I think it was right before I got hurt. And
then never happened again.
No, but I've had footprints in my backyard here. I live up here in the mountains in Prescott, and I've had that type of stuff happen intermittently. Things moved around that make no sense. And I'll attribute that to them. They know where I am. I believe that. And I think they've on occasion swung by.
So now, first of all, I want to preface this by saying I'm really sorry about your father passing. And you sent along a video to me that I can, of course, link to people in the show notes at intothefrayradio.com for this episode. If you just want an easy way to go, click on that. I will link, of course, the Arizona Squatch channel. But this particular video is you and Kevin, and then Kevin kind of taking us on a tour of your area and explaining something pretty incredible that happened that ties in with your father passing away, right? Can we talk
Right
about
on.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is in May of this past year, and Kevin and I had decided to head out for a 2 or 3 nighter up on the rim. So I'm driving along the 260, which runs beneath the Mogollon Rim, like I said, east to west, out to New Mexico. And my brother calls me, and he informs me that my father had passed away a few minutes before. He was there. My sister was there. I had said my goodbyes to my dad, who was unconscious for the last couple of days, the day before, on a FaceTime. And so I pull over to the side of the road, and I call my wife, and I call my sons and let them know that their grandfather passed away and my dad had passed away. And I was hesitant. I'm like, what am I doing? What should I be doing right now? I don't know. I'm in Arizona. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. So I just decided to just continue on with my plans because, quite frankly, I couldn't think of a better place to process the death of my dad than out in nature, and just being unplugged. So I continue on, and I cut up onto the rim, and I get up on the top of Rim Road, which runs along the edge of the rim. And I'm in reflection. I'm thinking about my dad and I had a complicated relationship, but I loved my father and he loved me. So I turn off to head back into the forest roads that head back into where we were meeting up. I get to an intersection of two of these are like trails. I mean, these days I've got a fully land off-road ready Tacoma, which can go basically anywhere. I get to this intersection and I get the loudest, deepest mind speak in my head. And it says, "We mourn with you the loss of your father, and we celebrate that he is at peace with the Creator now." And this wasn't like a thought. This was literally projected into me. And I pulled over, and I just started to shake because I had control of my emotions about the death of my dad right till that point. And I just had a flood of grief and sorrow come over me, and a bit of relief too at what they said. It was kind of consoling, And so I pull it together, and I head further down the road, and I see Kevin hiking up the road. I pull over, and I should jump in, and we drive back to the campsite, and I tell him what happened. And so, and Kevin knew my dad. And so, I was with my best friend in nature, processing the loss of my friend, in a better place for me to be. Somebody that I trust implicitly, that I'm very close to. That's also somewhat of a kind of a spiritual kind of advisor for me in a lot of ways, So that night was off the chain. It was probably a top 3 experiential night that I've ever had. We had a full physical. We saw a white one that we've seen off and on for a few years, and it stayed in place for minutes, and it was crouched down about 40 yards away from us, and it was right before dusk, so it was great light, and it just stared at us, and then it kind of dipped down and it disappeared, but it was there for I'm going to say almost 10 minutes. Like it was really long, like unusually long. That night we got a light show put on us that was just, they were all around us. I mean, and then we had, again, I'll preface this by saying some of these things, when I speak about them publicly out loud, they sound so outlandish, but this is what happened. So a backstory on this: Kevin had years ago an encounter with an elder of this clan that lives up here, and they had somewhat of a mentor relationship for a couple of years, and that being died, passed away. And there's a story to that was unbelievable too. But his mate, his spouse, came into the camp, and she stood in front of us, cloaked, but you could see her clearly. And she spoke to me and reiterated, and it was her voice that had been in my head hours and hours before that. And she talked to us for about a minute. And I felt like that entire night was almost like a celebration of my father's life. That's how I felt. Like they were grieving and celebrating. I get choked up talking about it. It was powerful. And that was the gist of that night. It was just and I don't know if that's what was going on, but that's how I discern it as what was going on.
Chris, did they ever speak using their actual mouths at you while they're completely phased in? Like when they look fully like a classic Bigfoot?
Yes. Only twice in my experience, and 2-word type things like what do you want, or why are you here? And Kevin had a lot more of that than I had with this. So this, remember I told you that they've given us names that we can call them.
Mm-hmm.
So common suffix to their names that not all of them seem to have. And Chuck keeps a list of names that we've been given. It's around 37 or 38 names. It's a lot. And that's all through the Southwest. That's not just in Arizona. So one of the common suffixes is the word GAN, G-A-A-N. And that's how we perceive it to be spelled. And so the entity that they used to interact quite frequently with Kevin's name was Eating Gan. And so, and not all of them have that name. We have one named Paradagon, Tarragon. There's a whole bunch of these names, but not all of them have that suffix. So we've had these names given to us, or that we've been told we can call them for 5 years now. And like I said, one of the suffix to many of these names has the word GAN in it. So about 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, we're walking through the History Museum in Payson. And Payson sits below the Mogollon Rim. And Chuck, who's retired, is one of the tour guides and curators. So he's walking Kevin and I through the museum. I'd never been there. Well, they have a section dedicated to the Apaches. This is Apache country where I live. I mean, most of the reservations around here are either Navajo or Apache people, right? And I've made inroads with them for years and gotten some great information out of them. But so there's this one section of the museum dedicated to the Apaches, and it's talking about the sacred peaks, the 4 peaks in Arizona. Mount Mingus and I can't remember what all of them off the top of my head, but all of those mountains are sacred to the Apaches and to the Navajos and the Hopis, right? And they're part of the San Franciscans, and they're huge. So the Apache people speak of the spirits of the mountains and forests that they revered, somewhat worshipped, and they were considered protectors of the Apache people, and they looked over the Apache people. And the name of these spirits is, so I've done a little bit of a deeper dive and looked into the stories of
Chris,
amongst these people.
Sorry to interrupt you. This is so crazy. And anybody listening, I'll leave this little portion in that I'm saying right this second, because people won't know listening back, because I'll have butted things together and edited it a little bit, because we're having some incredible technical difficulties during this, which only happens if we're talking about the quote unquote stranger side of Bigfoot. But Chris, the second that you went to say the name is when StreamYard dropped. So if you could go back and say that name that you found, then we can actually have that in the recording, because that's the exact part that StreamYard dropped. Pretty strange.
That's incredible timing. The name that the Apaches referred to of these spirits and beings of the mountains and the woods is the GAN. So not that we look for a lot of validation, but we don't believe that there's any coincidence that the names that we've been given have the suffix of the term GAN in them. And that is exactly, and what they're talking about when they talk about these spirits, they're talking about Sasquatch. They're talking about the hairy man. That's what they are. And the names of these beings that we've been given some names to have that suffix in their name as Taragan, Eadengan. They all have, many of them have the term Gan in there, which we thought there's no such thing as a coincidence, and that was not coincidental. So not that we look for a lot of validation, but that was pretty validating for us.
Well, that must have been like, I mean, talk about more than a light bulb moment. That must have been a huge, oh my God, gracious me. What
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's right there on this whole placard at the museum, and
that's
so
cool.
What it did was it vested us with a lot more. All of us, I think, took a deeper dive, and not that we hadn't already taken a pretty deep one into the local tribal spiritual beliefs, because I always think it is the epitome of hubris and arrogance to dismiss 15,000 years of North American culture as being savage and barbaric. How can you dismiss these people's history and teachings that have gone on for thousands of years before a Caucasian Western European ever set foot that we know of in North America? And every one of these tribes, I mean, I lived in Rhode Island. I was friends with members of the Narragansett Indian tribe, straight through to the Southwest, Northern California, central United States, down into South America, quite frankly, and Central America, all have in their histories. They all do. I mean, that's not a new thing, but I think that if we're looking for some clues and truth, that's probably the best starting point we could possibly have,
And a little black beetle just crawled across my notepad. How strange. I never have bugs in here. Okay. Things are weird and I love it. Okay.
Yeah, that's a sign we're doing the right thing.
That is exactly right, Chris. That is hell yes, we are. Okay, so I mean, considering it seems like things are ramping up even with the technical difficulty. So I'm gonna kind of wrap it up here, but I want to make sure that anything that you want to plug, for like, I mean, I mentioned the Arizona Squatch YouTube channel, right? Can we talk about that? And I mean, whatever else that you want to plug, please do.
Let's give a shout out to Chuck's channel as well.
Yes.
Chuck Jacobs. Chuck's is literally Chuck Jacobs on YouTube, but he was interviewed by the producers of A Flash of Beauty a couple of months ago, and his channel kind of blew up as a result of that. I don't have a channel by design, I don't think that's my I don't think that's what I don't think that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm lucky enough to be able to come on to shows like this. If I feel the need to speak my truth, I have platforms to do it on, but I like to remain a little bit less conspicuous than some of the other guys. You know what I mean?
No, I don't blame you for that. Oh, okay. So because if I don't ask this, people go, what the hell, Shannon? Why didn't you ask this? So because some of these sightings and activity is during the daylight hours where it's easier to get footage if you so chose to do that. Do you guys, if you pull out a camera, whether it be a phone or a Sony A6400, do things stop? Is that why you guys, and believe me, I get why putting footage out is essentially, it's worthless to other people because all they do is shit on it. Pardon my French, but that's the truth.
It's the truth. It only has value to the one taking the picture.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's
why you guys you're not going to see all this footage of phasing in and out and all that stuff.
We were asked not to. Literally, they don't like it. So like many people that research, and I think we consider ourselves like experiencers on a journey now. The research days are over and have been for a while. But there was a time where we had, parabolic mics and great camera full of pictures that I used to take some of them are great, but we were literally, and when we put the cameras down, put the tech away, and showed that we were doing that, the nature of our experiences changed, dramatically.
Right.
I mean, we started to get a lot more. I think it was a trust thing. I really do. I think they don't like it. I know they don't like it. I mean, they were literally mind spoken, and we all heard it, asked not to do it. So we don't, and if the days of having to provide evidence, if you don't know by now, like I'm never going to provide a shred of evidence it's ever changed a mind. You know what I mean? It's never changed a mind, and the need for it, that ship sailed back in the 60s, with quite frankly, with the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Right.
I mean, that's enough evidence that anybody would ever need, let alone, and plus AI. I mean, AI has driven the last nail into authenticity of any visual evidence. It just has.
Yeah.
So what's the point of it? I'm not here to change minds. I'm not here to argue about it. That's not my journey, man. I don't need to do that. I don't need to shout it from the rooftops to non-believers and try and influence it. What we do now, I feel like when I come on shows like yours, Shannon, is the true value is in the nature of the experiences and looking for commonalities, and that's where the real research is. It really is, I mean, to find alternate views and to look for common ground and to try and move the ball forward maybe a little bit by just delving into the nature of what's happened and sharing that with others that know. That's where maybe we'll gain some insights.
Well, no, you've definitely provided value today, Chris, and I cannot thank you enough for coming on and just being honest about what you guys have experienced. And, as Quato in Total Recall says, you have to open your mind a little bit more out there, folks, because there's other things going on. And I got to say, just if you guys could be present for what actually went on with Chris and I, this little dance that we've had to do because we've both got really good internet, and StreamYard has just been freaking out. I had a little beetle crawling across my notepad. Of all the places, I never have bugs in here. Kind of weird. So I love it. But Chris, a million thanks for coming on today with me.
Shannon, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed myself. You're a great interviewer, and I have appreciation for that. You ask poignant questions, and you're pleasant to talk to. So I appreciate the opportunity.